I was homeless until a strange man gave me a free house. It came with a set of rules and something that lived in the darkness. Serious, I was safer on the street. The stranger wasn't outwardly off. Not some 6 feet tall string bean of a man with repugnant facial features and the scent of perished brie. Yes, that was specific. During my 10 years sleeping rough, I met so many men who fitted that exact description. Their insides were just as spoiled as their outsides. But this particular man was a tall and handsome fellow in Oxford brogues, tailored trousers, and a puffered jacket with a fleece lining around the hood. He was warm and clean and comfortable and ordinary. He was entirely out of place in that alleyway I called home, filled with homeless folks of different backgrounds, junkies, runaways, and the mentally unwell. Being manic-depressive, I fell into the final category. The stranger's soft brown eyes settled upon me, a 29-year-old woman, sitting against a brick wall on a cold Saturday morning, shawled in tattered clothes and a sleeping bag. Then a familiarly nauseating fear sailed up my throat on a hot tide of phlegm. Here it comes, I thought, awaiting the man's crude offer. Yep, I know what you want. I've been here before. I always say no, but no doesn't always mean no, sir, does it? Not to men like you, anyway. How would you like to get off the street? He asked. I shook my head in response and said nothing. It was always best not to speak, as that might afford them a reason to say she gave me the wrong idea. The man's mouth dropped as if he just realized what he'd asked. Wait, no, it's nothing sordid. My heartbeat slowed its tempo a little. I believed him. You from a shelter or something? There are plenty of folks in this alley who need your help more than me. Give one of them a roof for the night instead. I'm fine. I'm not from a shelter. I just want to get you off the street. You said that already. The stranger looked around anxiously. One man was shooting something into his veins. Another was wailing something incoherent, and a police siren was caterwauling nearby. This outsider wasn't used to homeless people. He hadn't done this, whatever this might be, before. I wasn't sure whether that ought to settle me or not. He tried again. Let me start again. My name's Mark. What's yours? Amelia. Nice to meet you, Amelia. I want to put a roof over your head, indefinitely. Oh, so you are that type of man after all, I decided. Not interested, I said. I work for an agency, and we want to give you the title deed to a house for no cost at all. I'll pay the bills. Power, water, and food. But I won't live there myself. It'll be yours. All yours. Odd. I'd been offered all manner of things by strangers before, and I'd heard all manner of unusual stories from others on the street. Nothing like this. I didn't trust him for a moment, of course, but I was curious. Do you work for a charity? I asked. He frowned. No, not exactly. What's the catch? I expected him to lie and say catch. No catch, he didn't. Rosewood House is old. Very old, and every resident moves away eventually. They see things which make them question reality itself. I rolled my eyes. Right, it's a haunted house. My agency is a scientific one, Amelia. We research reality. Ours and those parallel to ours. We always have an explanation, but Rosewood House is different. There's something living in there. Something we haven't been able to explain with science. That's why they sent me, to study it from a distance. But for that to happen, the house needs an owner, a resident. The darkness in that place only appears when people appear. It's drawn to them. People who settle down there for too long. Come on. This is a free house, Amelia. Free. Nothing's free, I said, before sighing and tapping my temple with a finger. But when I became sick upstairs, the world shut me out. I made myself a promise because there sure as hell wasn't anyone else to vouch for me. Amelia, if the universe ever gives you a way off the streets, take it. Is that you saying yes? Asked Mark. I'd have to be insane to say no. I mean, I don't believe in haunted houses. The only evil I've ever seen is men. So if I catch you sneaking into my room and... Absolutely not. This is purely about finding someone brave enough to live in that place. Somebody desperate enough. Sure. Stupid enough? He shrugged. If so, I guess that makes me stupid too, because I'll be living only a few houses down the street from you. We left the alley and went to a local eatery. and one read through Mark's contract for transferal of deed ownership. Though I didn't believe in the supernatural, I believed in catches. I knew this was all wrong in some way, but I'd made myself a promise: get off the street. I didn't have it in me to spend another 10 years sleeping rough. Whatever happened next, I decided it had to be better than that. I should have realized I was wrong before signing the contract. You, the new owner of the property, agree to the following conditions. You will not enter the dining room. You will vacate the property if you see the dining room door standing open. You will vacate the property if a guest uses any of the following phrases. There's nothing in the doorway. The 11th time. I should stay. You will lock yourself in your bedroom whilst you sleep. You will not look at the sources of anomalous shadows. You will report all anomalous events to your agency liaison. Violation of any one of the above conditions may render this contract null and void, thereby returning the title deed for the property to the agency. By signing this contract, you forfeit the right to sell the property until the agency's initial 12-month research period has passed. I signed it. On an ordinary February afternoon, a few hours after sleeping rough in an alleyway, a stranger drove me to my new home in the suburbs. The whole thing was a fever dream. Footing a long cul-de-sac was Rosewood House, which seemingly held dominion over the rows of properties leading up to it, not only because it sat at the head of the table, but because it sat a story taller than its neighbors, shading them from the low afternoon sun, shading them with a darkness that felt alive to me, a darkness that ruled. It sat upon the house. Its Victorian throne of rosewood red bricks and gray gables. The shadow owned not only the property, but the entire cul-de-sac. It owned me. Its title was on my deed. I'd never had cause to believe in the supernatural before, but this primal fear of a living shade was like nothing I'd ever felt before. I remember Mark was so afraid of the place that he waved me off from the edge of the driveway. Into the house I went with my rucksack of scant belongings. Believe it or not, however, that first day was uneventful. I entered a grand lobby with a closed dining room door on the left and a grand staircase ahead. I told myself I must be having a manic depressive episode because there was nothing wrong with this house. It's just bricks and mortar. Bricks and mortar. Just a roof. Walls. Haunted houses are ghost stories for those who don't understand the meaninglessness of a house. You have a roof over your head, Amelia. Holy shit, you have a roof over your head. Be grateful. Mark really did deliver on his promise of caring for me. I thanked him every time he came by, but he was rarely brave enough to make it more than halfway up the front path before dumping the grocery bag on the paving slabs and taking a few steps back. He'd grace me with a little small talk, just to prevent me from entirely unraveling from social isolation, and I'd tell him I had nothing out of the ordinary to report. Then he'd wear a muddled mixture of disappointment and relief on his face. That was our routine for 10 months. From the end of one winter to the start of the next. The house charmed me, despite its garish 1950s decor and slightly unsettling imprint of bygone families on the walls. Photographs of mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters who no longer lived there. Then there were the gargantuan teddy bears in human clothing, propped up against the bedroom wall opposite my bed. They unnerved me at first, but I quickly found them to be endearingly watchful eyes while I slept. Life was much better. I was so much better. My depression remained, but to a lesser degree. I felt stable enough to get my life back on track. I enrolled as a mature student at a law university, putting my high school and sixth form qualifications to good use after 11 years. But now, in retrospect, I think I may have ignored things. You will not look at the sources of anomalous shadows. Maybe I'd become so accustomed to manic depression that I'd learnt the art of dismissing that darkness which creeps inwards from the periphery of one's visions and thoughts. You see, I often saw the strange shadows cast across the walls of Rosewood House. You will not look at the sources of anomalous shadows. And I didn't, but I knew that each one of those shapes, often with extremities like those of malformed limbs, did not stem from trees in the garden or the setting sun hitting Rosewood's interior at new angles. My eyes didn't have to trace the long shadows back to their sources. They always came from the dining room. You will report all anomalous events to your agency liaison. But I didn't. I hadn't wanted to let go of this perfect life. I had ignored the darkness, choosing bliss instead, choosing to maintain this better life off the streets, as I owed it to Amelia, who I viewed as a separate entity from myself. One night in December, however, something happened that proved impossible to ignore. I woke around 1 in the morning with eyes already on the door I had definitely bolted shut before climbing into bed. The open door. You will lock yourself in your bedroom whilst you sleep. My heartbeat hit a rapid rhythm, rapid enough for each pump to leap through my chest. Is this it? After 10 months, Mark has finally had his fun, and he's crept into the house to do something awful to me? That was the lie I told myself, but I felt the truth of it all, just as I had on that first day in February. This wasn't the manic depression. I wasn't insane. Something in Rosewood House was alive. You will lock yourself in your bedroom whilst you sleep. I'm not asleep, so I've not voided the contract. Besides, how will Mark know? Come on, he's a good man. He's not watching you at all times. You'd know if he were a creep. You'd know. I left my swaddling duvet and crept over to the open door, then strolled out onto the rickety upstairs landing of that 100-year-old house. It felt as if the floorboards might give way, dropping me down to the basement below, but the basement had never been what I feared. God, you've been lying to yourself, came that ever-chastising voice in my head. For 10 months, you've been scared shitless of the dining room. As I padded softly downstairs to the lobby, I squinted through the dark at that forbidden room on my right-hand side. My body jellied when I reached the bottom step and realized my eyes were playing no tricks on me. You will vacate the property if you see the dining room door standing open. Much like my bedroom door, there it stood, ajar. I staggered across the entryway inebriated with dread, legs betraying me. I didn't look at the door. That wasn't a condition in the contract. It was my own condition. Don't look at the door, Amelia. Don't look at the... You need to run. There came the voice, and then the blubbering of a boy, wispy and meek, from the black. Some maternal cord in my mind was tugged, and I involuntarily twisted to face the open dining room doorway. There was nothing in the doorway. There's nothing in the doorway. That strange wording from the contract filled my head, but I shoved it away and reached out for the front door handle. And the moment I wrapped my fingers around it, the stairs creaked. I'd almost known they would, almost foreseen it. Don't turn around, I told myself. Just open the door and run. It wasn't maternal instinct that made me look. It was morbid stupidity. There was little to make out with the dim street light coming through the 2 glass panes either side of the front door, but I saw enough. On the staircase was a little boy, perhaps 8 years old, unervingly familiar in his blue woolly jumper and gray joggers. You need to run, he repeated. Not without you, I blubbered, hand outstretched for him to take. With each slow step down the stairs, the streetlight was illuminating more of his form. The child's cheeks were caked with layers of blood, and filth and tears to cap the muck, like dew running off the carcass of a shot doe. My father had taken me hunting plenty of times. During my childhood, I'd seen my fair share of death, the carcass of a shot doe. Oh, God. Then the boy finished his thought. You need to run from me. I finally saw the whole of his face. Blood and tears and mud and clumps of what almost looked like stuffing sticking to his face like a mask. But in the spaces between the muck were strips of putrefying flesh and exposed pockets of skull. There were sockets without eyes and patchy clumps of hair atop his head. The boy was a walking corpse, and he wore a forced smile, as if put there by something else. The boy himself, if any of him were alive at all, was not gleeful, not malignant either. He warned me to run from him. Something else was puppeteering him. Something else was smiling within him. I turned to unlock the front door as the undead thing launched across the lobby, scuttling on all fours in insectile fashion, and then overgrown fingernails tore into my back, through cloth and skin. I shrieked, horrified by the prospect of an end more than the pain, but managed to yank the door inwards, hurling the creature off my back as I did. Then I launched onto the front path and towards the road. I didn't look back, just gunned for Mark's house and hammered on the door until he answered. Then I sobbed and fell into his arms. I wanted to ball my fists and pummel his chest as he held me. but I didn't have the might. Didn't have the right as far as I was concerned. He'd warned me about Rosewood House. I just hadn't believed him. Who would? I know I've got 2 months before I'll be allowed to sell the place, but that doesn't mean I have to live there. I'm going back to the street, I said. I'll let you stay the night here, but that thing will know if you leave the cul-de-sac for good, Mark whispered. Its reach doesn't end here. It has you now. It'll kill you like it killed the others. I bunched up his chest in my furious fingers. You told me the other families left. I lied, Amelia. Why? I cried. Because it took my son, Amelia. It took my son. I thought we were safe in this house while I did my research. We kept our distance from that accursed place. But it knew what I was doing. It called to Nathan, and he went missing in that place. I said nothing, finally letting my fists fly into the man's chest, and he did nothing to stop me. He just gently closed the door behind me, shutting me in his house. That thing won't let me inside, Amelia. It'll kill me before I find my son. I needed someone else. Someone new to move into the property. Nobody's wanted to live there for years. Not since the last family died in such a grotesque way. Your son's dead, I said. Little boy in a blue woolly jumper? He's dead. He tried to kill me. No, that was Richard, the son of the last family who lived there. This dark thing, this shadow, I said. Right. This shadow, it kills people and wears their corpses like clothes. That's only one of the many horrifying ways it presents itself, Amelia. But it torments in other ways. The shadow is keeping Nathan alive to taunt me and make sure I stay close by. I feel it. It feeds off us, Amelia. Off our pain, I think, or our mere presence. It always comes out of hiding whenever a new person moves into court. I don't care. Just tell me how to get away from this place, alive. What little we know has been gleaned from the horrible ways previous families died in that place, the things they told neighbors, the things we learnt from our research. We know nothing, Amelia. I know nothing. But I want my son, and that's a powerful motivator. You need to tell me what you saw, so we can better understand this shadow. Learn how to study, know how to beat it. It was walking death, I said. Richard, I mean. He came down those stairs caked in blood, tears, and clumps of stuffing. Stuffing? From the toys. I think he crept out of the dining room, broke into my room, and hid in that old pile of teddy bears, waiting for me to wake up. Old pile of teddy bears? Yeah, the large, ugly, weird ones, sitting against the far wall. Mark paused. Amelia, there should be nothing but a bed, a side table, and a wardrobe in that room. My gut fell away. I knew I'd recognized Richard's blue woolly jumper. I'd seen it every night, buried in amongst the dozen or so bulky stuffed toys. His corpse had been hiding there all that time. The shadow had been sitting in that rotting body and watching me sleep every night. I told myself it wasn't real stealing, Dot. Not the kind you picture when someone says the word out loud, Dot. This was recovery, reclaiming, retrieval. That's what the guy on the burner phone called it. Anyway, like changing the label, changed what it was. He didn't give me a name. I didn't give him mine. He sent a pin, a time, and a sentence that stuck to the roof of my mouth all day, like peanut butter. The owners aren't home. The security is old. Don't get sentimental. I wasn't sentimental. I was broke. It was late fall, and the air had that damp bite that makes everything smell like wet. Leaves and cold metal. I parked a few streets away because I'd seen enough true crime to know right in front is how you end up in a documentary. I walked the rest of the way with a small backpack, black gloves, and a cheap headlamp I'd tested in my bathroom mirror until it made me look like a raccoon. The mansion sat back off the road behind a fence that was more for show than function. Wrought iron, ornate curls, a gate that didn't look locked so much as it looked offended you thought it might be. The driveway was long and pale, lined with stone planters and little ground lights that were off. No motion sensors. No barking dogs. No cameras tracking me with a tiny red dot. When I tell you that should have been my first warning, I mean it. It was too easy. Like walking into a store where every employee is suddenly in the back. The side door was where the guy said it would. B, by a breezeway leading to a garage the size of my entire apartment building. The lock was older, not ancient, just neglected. You could feel it in the way the keyway accepted the pick, like it was tired of pretending. It clicked open in under a minute. I stood there in the narrow slice of dark between outside and inside, and I had that brief, stupid thought. If I turn around right now, nothing happens, but my bank app was a horror story all on its own. So I slipped in and shut the door behind me. The mansion smelled like expensive wood and something citrusy cleaning product. Maybe the kind of scent that's meant to signal wealth the way perfume signals desire. It wasn't dusty. It wasn't abandoned. It was maintained. The guy had said that owners weren't home, but the place felt like someone had just walked out 10 minutes ago. I found the hallway he'd described. Marble flooring. A runner rug that looked like it cost more than my car. Framed photos along the walls in heavy frames. Artsy. Angled shots of people I didn't recognize laughing over drinks, posed on boats, standing in front of snow-covered mountains. No kids. No pets. Just adults with money and time. My instructions were simple. Office, second floor. Small safe behind a painting. Blue velvet box. Inside it. Take the box. Leave everything else. That should have made it easier, right? A single target. No rummaging, no temptation. Except as I walked past the open archway to the living room, I saw a display case. Glass. Lit from inside. And on a velvet stand, a watch. Not just any watch. The watch. The kind men post online with their sleeves pulled up and captions like, "Hard work pays off." The kind my ex used to send me screenshots of with a laughing emoji like we weren't arguing about groceries. I stopped. I shouldn't have. I know I shouldn't have, but my brain did that quick, vicious math it always does when I see something valuable. Sell that and you're not just surviving, you're breathing. Stared at the lock on the display case. Tiny. Simple. Like it was there to keep out curious guests. Not someone who showed up with gloves and a headlamp. Told myself one extra thing didn't change the crime. Like there's a moral difference between stealing a box and stealing a box plus a watch. I popped the case with a quiet click and slid the watch into my pocket. Then I kept moving a little faster now, because that's the thing about stealing. You don't feel guilty so much as you feel hungry. One bite makes you want another. The staircase was wide and carpeted, the kind that makes your footsteps disappear. Upstairs, the hallway branched. The office was at the end. Double doors with brass handles. I pushed them open. The office was dark except for the faint glow of city light coming through tall windows. There was a big desk, a leather chair, shelves full of books people buy to look impressive. In the far corner hung a painting, abstract, expensive looking, all moody blues and blacks. Behind that painting, the guy said, was a safe. I crossed the room and lifted the edge of the frame, and the lights came on. Not one by one. Not flickering. Full. Bright overhead light, like a stage. I froze so hard my shoulders ached. Then the office door behind me clicked. A lock engaging. Not a latch settling. A real lock. Mechanical. Final. My mouth went dry. I spun and ran to the doors and yanked. Locked. I threw my shoulder into them. Nothing. Not even a rattle, like the door was part of the wall now. Behind me, something made a soft sound. A chair moving. I turned slowly, and that's when I saw him. He was sitting behind the desk like he'd been there the whole time. Like I'd walked into his office hours late and interrupted him. Dark clothes. No mask. No dramatic hood. Just a man, calm as a person waiting for a late delivery. He looked up from a notebook. Not angry, not excited, mildly annoyed. Like? I was a telemarketer. Hi, he said. Then comma with the energy of someone clocking in. Okay. Here we go. My throat tightened. Who are you? He sighed, like I'd asked him to explain the concept of gravity. I'm the person who owns the house you broke into, he said. Or, more accurately, I'm the person who keeps the house you broke into. He set the notebook down and laced his fingers together. And you? He added, eyes sweeping over me like he was inspecting a dent in a car. are underdressed for this, but points for the gloves. It's always the gloves. People act like wearing gloves makes them invisible. My heart was hammering, so hard it made my ears ring. I backed away from the desk, eyes darting to windows, to anything. The windows were tall, but the glass looked thick. The kind that doesn't shatter when you throw a chair at it. The kind rich people pay for because they don't like surprises. Let me out, I said. He blinked once. Slow. Double quotes. No, I'll leave. I won't tell anyone. Sure, he said, like I'd offered him a coupon, and I'll grow wings and start migrating. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the desk. How's your night going? You feeling successful? You get what you came for? I didn't answer. His eyes flicked to my pocket. He sighed. That's a yes. I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't made a sound. I hadn't turned my head, but he knew. He tapped the notebook with one finger. Let's do inventory, since you're going to pretend you didn't. I stared at him, breathing shallow. You came for a velvet box, he said, as if reading a grocery list. You also took the watch from the case downstairs, the one you thought was easy. My blood went cold, he continued, unfazed. You also pocketed the silver letter opener from the hallway table when you came in, the one shaped like a bird. I instinctively touched my bag. It was there. Hadn't even remembered grabbing it. He nodded like he'd expected that. And you moved the small sculpture on the living room shelf. Didn't take it, but you moved it. Left fingerprints on the base, even with gloves. That's the fun part. Everyone has a tell. How do you... I started. No? He finished, because you're not the first. He flipped a page in the notebook like this was a routine he did every week. 2 weeks ago, he said, a guy with a crowbar took a bracelet from the upstairs bathroom. He broke my sink. I didn't love that. Last month, someone tried for the wine cellar. She got stuck in the pantry for 3 hours and cried so hard she threw up. The month before that, my skin crawled. Why is this happening? Because someone tells them, he said simply. Someone always tells them. People don't just wake up and decide to play burglar roulette on a mansion in the woods. They get a whisper, a nudge, a little promise. He looked at me like I was slow. You got a whisper. I was hired. He sat back. And you believed it would be clean. Transactional. You steal. You get paid. You go home. You don't think about who set the table. He watched my face for a beat, then shrugged. Anyway, he said, brightening like the topic had shifted to the weather. You're in my office. You're locked in. You're going to give me back what you took. And then you're going to answer a few questions. I shook my head. No. His eyebrows lifted. No. No, I repeated, because my mouth moved faster than my brain. I'm leaving. He stared at me like I'd just told him. I planned to breathe underwater. Then he reached under the desk. I flinched hard enough my shoulders tensed, ready for a gun. What he pulled out wasn't a gun. It was a small remote. He pressed a button. Somewhere in the room, a speaker clicked on hidden, clean, built into the walls. A voice came through it. Not his. A recording. A woman's voice, strained and trembling. Please, it said. Please don't. The sound cut off with a sharp click. My stomach dropped. I felt my skin prickle. He watched me watch him. Expression unreadable. That, he said, is what no sounds like in here. I couldn't speak. My tongue felt glued to my teeth. He set the remote down gently. Now, he said, I can do this the patient way or the messy way, and I hate messy. Messy is work. I clenched my jaw. What do you want? He smiled. That's the first honest thing you've said. He gestured toward my pocket. You're going to put the watch on the desk. I didn't move. He tilted his head. Or you don't, and I take it off. You, which is harder? Which is messy? I stared at him, and I hated that the calmness worked. Hated that my body believed it. Slowly, with shaking fingers, I pulled the watch out and placed it on the desk. He nodded. Double quotes. Good. Now, the letter opener. I set it down too. Great, he said. Now the velvet box you came for. I don't have it. You don't have it yet. You were about to. He sighed like I was exhausting him. Okay, fine, we'll do it another way. He opened his notebook again. Tell me who sent you. I shook my head. He waited, patient, I realized, then the silence in the mansion wasn't the absence of people, it was control. I don't know, lead. It was just a number. He sighed, then. He pressed the remote again. The speaker clicked, this time it wasn't a voice, it was a sound. A low, wet scraping followed by a muffled sob, followed by something that sounded like fingernails dragging on wood. My stomach rolled. The sound stopped. He didn't look at the speaker. He looked at like he was watching a reaction video. I keep receipts, he said. Not money receipts, behavioral receipts. What is that? I whispered. He shrugged. A reminder that you're in a place where the rules aren't yours. Who sent you? He repeated, still flat. I don't know, I said. And this time it was half true. I didn't know a name. I didn't know a face. I knew a voice on a phone and a promise. His eyes narrowed not. Angry. Focused. He stood and came toward me. This time he didn't stop halfway. I backed up until my calves hit the edge of a leather couch I hadn't noticed before. Stop, I said. He stopped not because he respected it, but because he wanted me to notice. He stopped. I hate when people make this physical, he said, sounding genuinely inconvenienced. It's always such an overreaction. Then he moved. He grabbed my wrist, twisted, and pain tore through me like a bright flash. I made a noise. I'm not proud of that. My knees buckled. He didn't let go. He guided me down to the floor, like he was kneeling a kid for a photo. I'm not breaking it, he said conversationally. Not yet. I'm just making it difficult for you to do dumb stuff. He released me, and I cradled my wrist against my chest. Breathing hard, he picked up my backpack, unzipped it, and rummaged with the casual familiarity of someone going through their own drawer. He pulled out my phone. No service, he said, turning it over. Then he looked at me. Still want to pretend you're in control? What do you want? I repeated, smaller. He smiled. You already asked? That means you're learning. He walked back behind the desk, set my phone down, and tapped his notebook. Do you know what you stole? He asked. Before tonight? I stared at him. Nothing. Sure. You did? He said. Not from here, from the area. He rattled it off like weather. Red scarf from a car on the side of the road. Camera from a campsite. Tools from a garage. Cash from a tip jar. A necklace off a hook. My stomach twisted. You took the watch because it made you feel like you deserved to. Breathe, he said. Like wearing something expensive would make you a different person. My wrist throbbed with every heartbeat. And the velvet box? He added, pointing toward the painting. Doesn't matter. That's just bait. That's just to get you in the room. My blood went cold. You're lying, I said. But it came out thin. He stood, slid the painting aside, and knocked once on the safe door. A soft click answered from inside. Then the safe opened by itself. My stomach dropped. Inside weren't stacks of cash. Inside were rows of small velvet boxes, different colors, different sizes each, labeled with tape and a date. Like evidence, he pulled out a blue velvet box and held it up without opening it. You were hired to steal this, he said, because whoever hired you wanted to see if you'd do it. He set it on the desk gently. Now, he said, tell me who sent you. I don't know, I whispered. He sighed dramatically. God, this is boring. You're making it boring. He picked up my phone again. It lit up in his hand. Full bars. That shouldn't have been possible. But it was. He turned it so I could see the contact name on the screen. Home. The phone started ringing. He didn't answer it right away. He just watched me. Go ahead, he said. Pick it up. I shook my head. No. He answered it himself, put it on speaker, and set it down. A man's voice filled the room. Sarcastic, familiar, mildly irritated. Did she take it? The voice asked. The man at the desk smiled like someone who'd just heard their favorite song. She took the watch, he said into the phone, and a letter opener. She almost took the box. She's trying her best. A pause, then the voice on the phone laughed softly. Always. With the watch? My brain refused to line the pieces up because lining them up meant admitting something. Impossible. The man looked at me like I was slow. Say, hi. He told me. The phone voice went warmer, intimate in a way that made my skin crawl. Hi. Same voice, because it was him. Not a helper. Not a client. Just him. Playing both sides like it was a game. You hired me, I said, and my voice shook. He shrugged. Yeah, why? He leaned on the desk, casual. Because you were willing. The phone crackled faintly. Send her out, the voice said. I'm hungry. I flinched. Hungry? Not like that, the man said, waving a hand like I was being dramatic. Not. Teeth. Not blood. Not unless you make it complicated. He walked to the office doors and unlocked them with a remote. The doors swung. Open a hallway beyond dark now, like the mansion had swallowed its own lights. Somewhere deeper inside, something moved. Slow footsteps. Patient. A soft drag that could have been fabric or nails. The man stepped aside and nodded toward the hall. Good news, he said lightly. You're not trapped anymore. My throat tightened. You're letting me go? He blinked. No. He smiled, bright and mean. I'm letting you run. I didn't remember standing up. I remember the sound behind me getting closer, like someone strolling through their own home. I remember my wrist screaming when I pushed off the floor, and I remember running into the dark hallway of a mansion that suddenly felt enormous. Every doorway a mouth, every corner a place something could wait. Behind me, the man called out, cheerful, like he was waving goodbye. Try the front door first, he said. It's always funny. The hallway lights snapped off. Not a dim, not a fade. Off. My headlamp beam cut a thin tunnel through the dark, and the mansion felt wrong in it, too glossy, too quiet, too sure of itself. I sprinted blind, following memory and panic, trying to picture the layout I'd walked through earlier like it was a map in my head. A corner, a staircase. The living room archway. Something moved at the edge of my light, not fully stepping into it like it didn't need. Too, like it was content to let me burn. Energy. I hit the staircase and took it 2 steps at a time. My bad wrist made my balance weird. My fingers tingled. I kept expecting it to give out completely. At the bottom, I turned too sharp. My shoulder slammed the wall. The headlamp beam swung wide, and I caught a flash of the glass display case, the one I'd opened. It was shattered now. Not broken like an accident, shattered like someone had hit it from the inside. I barely registered it before my foot slid. My boot came down on a scatter of glass. It skated. I went down hard. My knee hit first. My hip, then my palm. My good hand caught a slice of something sharp. But the worst wasn't my hand. It was my thigh. A long, hot line of pain opened up above my knee, like someone had drawn a razor across me. I screamed without meaning to. Warmth spilled immediately, fast enough that my jeans went heavy and sticky in seconds. My headlamp rolled and pointed at the ceiling, turning the world into a sick white glare. I scrambled upright, grabbing my leg. Blood soaked through my fingers. Not a little. Not a scrape. Enough that I felt lightheaded instantly, like my body was already pulling the hay. This is serious. Lever. From the dark hallway behind me, I heard a sound, not footsteps, a soft, pleased exhale. Then his voice close, annoyed, like I'd dropped a plate. Oh, for... He stepped into my headlamp beam, like he'd been following at a leisurely pace the whole time. He looked down at the blood on my hands, then at the shattered case, then back at me. His expression wasn't horror. It was irritation. You know, he said, I had that case custom made. I pressed my back to the wall, sliding down, shaking. Stay away. He held up both hands like I was being dramatic in public. I'm not going to kill you, he said. Don't flatter yourself. He crouched in front of me, eyes flicking to my thigh. The blood kept coming. I could feel it running down my leg, into my sock. His mouth tightened. That's inconvenient. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded cloth clean. White, too neat. He pressed it hard to the wound, like he'd done this before. I flinched and tried to push him away with my injured wrist. Pain shot up my arm and I hissed. He glanced at my wrist like it offended him. 2. You're falling apart. Why are you doing this? I whispered. He looked up at me, eyes flat. Because you take what isn't yours, he said. Because you tell yourself you're just doing what you have to. Because you want the world to be soft when you're desperate. He pressed harder on my leg. Stars popped behind my eyes. Then he leaned in, voice low and dry. And because if you bleed out on my floor, it becomes a paperwork situation. I stared at him, dizzy. You're taking me to a hospital? He made a face like I'd asked him to spend the weekend with my family. Yes, he said. Unfortunately. He stood, still holding pressure with the cloth, and clicked something on the remote. Somewhere, a door unlocked with a soft, obedient sound. Here's the deal, he said, voice brightening like he was laying out house. Rules. You're going to the ER. You're getting stitches. You're getting your wrist checked because you're going to pretend it's fine, and then it'll be a fun surprise. Later, he looked me over, and then he added, You're going to leave because I'm not a monster. I laughed one sharp, broken sound. You're not? He smiled like I'd finally said something entertaining. I'm a correction, he said. He hauled me up like I weighed nothing and half-dragged. Half-walked me through the mansion. My vision pulsed. The floor seemed to tilt. The front door opened before we reached it. Of course it did. Outside, his car was waiting in the driveway like it had always been there. He put me in the passenger seat with an efficiency that felt practiced. Seat belt clicked. Cloth pressed to my leg, my wrist folded into my lap like it was an object that needed to behave. He slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled away without hurry. I watched the mansion disappear behind. The trees. It didn't feel like escape. It felt like being moved to a different room. The hospital lights were too bright. The waiting room smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant and fear. Walked me in with one hand at my elbow like a concerned partner. Found her on the side of the road, he told the triage nurse. Voice bored but convincing. Glass. She fell. The nurse looked at me. Is that what happened? My throat tightened. His fingers pressed lightly into my arm. Nothing painful. Just enough to remind me he could make it painful whenever he wanted. I swallowed. Yes. He smiled faintly, like I'd done a good job. They took me back fast, because I was bleeding through the cloth. A doctor asked questions. I answered in short sentences. First name only. No details. No story that could be checked. They numbed my leg, and I stared at the ceiling tiles while they stitched me up, counting staples in the acoustic panels because I needed something to do with my brain besides. Screamed. My wrist got wrapped too. Not broken, but sprained bad enough that the doctor said no lifting, and looked at me like I was going to do it anyway. When it was done, when my thigh was bandaged and my wrist was immobilized and my paperwork was handed over, I looked around for him. He was sitting in the corner chair of the discharge area, legs crossed, scrolling his phone like he was waiting for a table at a restaurant. He looked up when he saw me. Double quotes. Oh, good, he said. You're functional again? I tried to stand and my legs screamed. I wobbled. He stood, caught me by the elbow, steady as a railing. The nurse smiled at him. She's lucky she had you. He gave the nurse the kind of smile you give a dog you don't like. Lucky, he repeated. We walked out together. The night air hit my face and I almost cried from the normalness of it. He opened the car door for me again, then paused. Before you go, he said. My stomach tightened. He held out my watch. Not the mansion watch. Mine. The cheap one I'd worn in. He dropped it into my hand. You didn't steal this, he said. You just forgot it mattered. I stared at him, confused. He leaned in slightly, voice quiet. You don't get to keep things from my house, he said, but I'm not taking your time. Then he stepped back and waved a hand like he was dismissing me from an appointment. Your phone's in your bag, he added. You've got service again. Call whoever you need to call. Tell them you fell. Tell them you were stupid. Tell them whatever you want. He tilted his head, eyes flat again. Just don't tell them about me, he said, because if you do, I'm going to start inventory. My mouth went dry. Inventory of what? He smiled. All the little things you've taken, he said. From anywhere, all the little moments you've justified. He tapped my bandaged thigh with one finger light. Almost playful, right where the stitches pulled beneath the gauze. And I'll be honest, he added, hospitals are my favorite. Everyone's already bleeding. No one asks why. I stood there shaking, trying not to collapse. He stepped back toward his car, then stopped like he'd remembered something mildly annoying. Oh, he said, one more thing. He pointed past me toward the hospital entrance, where a TV played low in the corner of the lobby. On the screen was the local news. A headline scrolled under footage of flashing lights in the woods. Homeowner offers reward after string of local thefts. He stared. He didn't. He just opened his car door, slid in and started the engine. As he pulled away, he rolled down the window a crack. I'll see you when you get hungry again, he called. Like this was a casual promise between friends. Then he drove off into the dark, and I realized something that made my stomach turn colder than the night air. He hadn't needed to trap me forever. He just needed to make sure I left with proof that he could. And now every time my thigh pulls where the stitches are, I remember his voice like it's stitched in there, too sarcastic, bored, certain like I was never the point, just the next person on the list. Times are tough, they say. I've heard that a hell of a lot in my life. I've slept on sidewalks using sheets of cardboard to shield myself from the sun. I've been robbed at knife point while living at a shelter. Until recently, I lived in a share house with 6 flatmates, but I was never formally on the lease, and they kicked me out when I couldn't afford the rent increase. Thankfully, I directed my small trickle of cash flow to train as an elevator technician, a solid trade, something I could do with my own 2 hands, something no one could take from me. So after my last job for the day, a run-of-the-mill hotel in Mott Haven, I simply never left. I just stayed in the maintenance room. I'd fixed the elevator, so they had no reason to go investigating. And who were they gonna call me? I plumped up my backpack as a makeshift pillow and hunkered down for the night. I didn't mind sleeping on the floor. The concrete was cool to the touch. In one corner of the room was an exposed pipe, which I stuffed with an old shirt. Experience taught me something nasty, like rats or cockroaches, were apt to crawl out of there. The hardest part about sleeping in the maintenance room was the beeping. All night the elevator would ring, even at odd hours like 3 o'clock in the morning. I figured there'd been an event on a party hosted in one of the rooms. It didn't pass ding, ding every night. When the elevator moved during these hours, it sounded like it was moving down. I had access to the whole MCP form. That's a piece of documentation detailing the whole elevator shaft. The maintenance room was on the ground floor, and there were no basement floors listed, at least none on file. I brushed it off as acoustics, how the sound bounced off the concrete walls, but the sound was particularly annoying in its persistence. At least when sleeping on the street, all the sounds merged into one. There were new sounds, 2 glasses clinking together, cutlery scratching plates, a cat, or some sort of wild animal yowling, tired and cranky. I traced the sounds and found they were loudest near the pipes. I removed the old shirt. I'd stuffed down the exposed hole, and it became clear. People were having dinner, a party, and it was coming from below. Still, the room was safe, and I could stick a wrench through the door handle to stop people getting in. No sun to scorch my skin, no rain to turn the walls soggy until they collapsed on top of me. When living is tough, you learn pretty quickly to accept things as they are and not push your luck. So I plotted on ignoring the sounds. People came and went visiting the basement dining room at inappropriate hours. If I pressed my ear against the door, I could hear them talking. One night there had been a heavy wet plod, and then a man said, "Quiet, piggy." The smells would drift up from the pipe, and I hadn't smelt any pork that night, more like minced veal and a bitter stench like too much garlic. In the early hours of the morning, when I snuck out to go to work, there were brown stains like machine oil streaking the floor leading right to the elevator doors. It pissed me off more than anything. Here I was living in a cell while they dined lavishly. The other night there were 2 men speaking outside the door. "Is the meal prepared for tonight?" Yes, a full course caught fresh, and the tools sharpened. They chuckled to themselves as the elevator arrived, and I listened to their voices drift off, drift down. Coincidentally, my job, the Next day was at this very hotel. I dipped out amidst the morning rush when the front desk staff were overwhelmed and wouldn't notice. After pretending to park my van, the hotel manager greeted me in the lobby. "Back so soon," he drawled. I recognized the voice immediately. I'd heard it just last night. "What can I say? This lift sees a lot of use." He raised an eyebrow, so I followed up. "This place must fit 150 guests." "About so, yes." He left me at the elevators, and I went to work on the issue a 12th floor button that wouldn't register when pressed. A simple enough problem. We get about one a week. I'd coordinated with the in-house maintenance team to shut down the power until I was done halfway. Through the job, the elevator doors suddenly rattled shut. "Hey, what the fuck?" The elevator started moving, and although no buttons were lit up, I could feel that it was moving down. The doors opened onto near total darkness. In the center of the room was a long glass table, the type you see in an executive boardroom. The table was set entirely in glass plates, cups, even knives thin as broken. Window shards above the table were 3 hooks, glass hooks. Before I could see more, the doors closed again, and the elevator shifted back up to the ground floor. I stumbled out into the lobby, a little dazed. The hotel manager was speaking with some guests in fancy suits. He spotted me and excused himself. "Is it all fixed?" "Almost. I just need to grab a screwdriver from my van." I already had my tools with me, but I needed to grab something else from my van. An inflatable mattress that I could blow up once I was done with the job. The elevators had cameras. If I reported anything, they'd see it was me. I'm in no position to help anyone. I just need a place to sleep. And truth be told, I've slept through worse. James Whitmore didn't know when his life had slipped into this kind of silence after Helen died after decades together, and the children had grown and married and moved away, leaving the house too large too, echoing too empty. He sold his suburban home and bought a cabin in the Adirondacks, a place isolated deep in the woods where the nearest neighbor was miles away, and the road became a twisted trail barely wide enough for a car. The cabin itself was old stone and timber with a steep roof, and windows that looked like the eyes of something watching from inside the dark forest. The first night he stayed there, he could hear the wind rattling the shutters and branches scraping against the roof like long fingernails scratching to get. And he lit the fireplace, but it smelled like damp earth and rotting leaves more than smoke. The walls groaned under the weight of the cold, and James felt an uneasy thrill of fear that he hadn't felt since he was a boy. Alone in the attic, he explored every room cautiously. The floors creaked with every step, as if whispering secrets about the years it had stood there. The kitchen had cupboards filled with dusty jars, and the silverware drawer stuck when he tried to open it, and inside were knives, dulled and bent as if someone had used them for more than cooking. The nights became worse the first week. He slept lightly, waking to shadows that moved at the edge of the firelight, sometimes thinking it was the trees outside pressing against the glass, but other times hearing footsteps, soft and slow, on the upstairs floor where he slept. And once he swore he heard a voice whispering his name, though when he looked there was nothing except the dark staring back at him. He tried to tell himself it was grief or imagination, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave. He began to notice strange things. The wood pile would be scattered in the morning. Although he had stacked it neatly, the path to the lake sometimes had footprints too large for any animal he knew, and at times the water itself seemed to ripple when there was no wind. One evening he lit the fire early and settled with a book, but the flames flickered violently, though the air was still, and from the corner of the room a shadow stretched across the floor, and he could feel a cold presence moving slowly around him. He told himself to get up to check the window, but his legs refused, as if rooted to the spot. The shadow paused, and then seemed to lean closer, and he could hear the faintest scraping, like claws on stone. When he finally dared to move, nothing was there, except the fireplace dying embers and the echo of a faint, long exhale. He started hearing whispers at night, sometimes talking in languages he didn't understand, sometimes his own name spoken over and over in tones that were both pleading and accusing. He tried to leave the cabin, but the forest seemed to shift around the car, the trail twisting and turning, so that no matter which way he drove, he ended up back at the cabin at dusk. The birds refused to sing, the sky seemed darker, and the air heavier, as if pressing down on him. One night he found a message carved into the frost on the living room window. "Stay And the next morning the snow outside was trampled in patterns that led from the edge of the forest to the door, although he had locked it. James tried to rationalize it all. He told himself that grief made him see things in the shadows that weren't there, that wind and ice and old wood made the noises that frightened him, but the feeling of being watched, of someone or something waiting in the trees, never left him. The fire wouldn't burn for long, and the nights stretched endlessly, shadows pooled in corners where none should be, and the cabin felt alive like it was breathing around him. Sometimes, at night, he would wake to footsteps coming up the stairs and the sound of someone moving softly through the rooms the old mirrors reflected. Not just him, but shapes that shifted behind him. He would spin around and nothing was there yet. The mirrors would catch glimpses of figures standing still in the corners of his vision. He began talking to the shadows, asking them to leave, to stop, but the whispers would laugh softly and press closer until he felt the walls vibrating with voices that weren't his own. By the third week he stopped leaving the cabin. Even during the day the forest seemed to pulse around him, with eyes in the trees and cracks in the rocks that looked like faces watching his every step. The wind carried moans and cries that were human but not human, and in the lake he began to see shapes moving beneath the surface, eyes glowing faintly in the dark water, and James realized with a deep, sinking dread that he was no longer alone in the cabin, that even in the day, even with sunlight, the shadows had followed him, and the whispers were constant, always present, just outside, hearing him breathing, just outside, waiting for the night to fall again. The isolation that once felt like peace had turned into terror. He couldn't call anyone for help. He had no one, and even if he tried to leave, the forest refused him. The trees closed around the trail. The shadows thickened, and at night the cabin seemed to sigh with relief. At his fear, he began leaving scraps of food outside, hoping whatever watched him would be satisfied, hoping it would leave him alone. But at night he would hear chewing in the dark, soft slurps and wet tearing sounds echoing from the forest, and the cabin itself would groan like it had appetite. And James lay awake in his bed, trembling, listening as the wind whispered through the broken shutters, and the shadows in the corners seemed to lean closer and closer until they were inside him, and he understood that he had bought a place in isolation to live out the rest of his life. But what he hadn't realized was that the cabin had always had residents of its own, residents who never left, residents who had only been waiting for someone like him to move in. And now James Whitmore stays there every night, listening to the soft steps, the faint scratching, the whispering shadows in the walls, talking to the shapes in the mirrors, and sometimes he swears he sees Helen smiling at him through the frost on the windows while the whispers laugh softly behind her. And he wonders if leaving is ever possible, if solitude is something anyone can truly escape from, when the forest has eyes and the cabin has memory and the shadows do not forgive and do not forget. James woke before dawn to the creaking of floorboards above the fireplace. Wind had stopped, but the cabin hummed with a low vibration that seemed alive. He rose slowly, each movement stiff with dread. The mirror in the hallway caught his eye, and for a moment he swore the reflection moved on its own. The shadows behind him stretched longer than they should have been, curling around corners and pooling under the doors. He felt a cold draft on the back of his neck and turned quickly. Nothing was there but the faint smell of damp wood and decay. He dressed quickly in layers of wool and flannel, the floor cold beneath his bare feet, and stepped outside the cabin. The forest was silent for once. No birds, no rustle of leaves, only the faint crunch of his boots on the frost-covered ground. He checked the perimeter of the cabin, noticing tracks in the snow that weren't his own. Small footprints, sometimes large footprints, sometimes the impression of hands pressed into the ground as if someone had crawled beneath the snow. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. The lake lay still ahead, a mirror of black ice, but beneath the surface ripples formed slowly like something breathing under the water. He tightened his coat and returned inside, leaving the cabin door ajar for reasons he didn't understand, yet sensing that whatever followed him needed the invitation. Inside the cabin, the fireplace had died completely. The room was colder than it should have been, and James felt a strange weight in his chest, like the air itself pressed down on him. He moved to the kitchen to make coffee, and noticed the knives in the drawer were no longer bent, but polished to a sharp shine as if recently used and carefully cleaned. The cupboard doors were slightly open, and jars rattled softly when he passed them. The whispering started again. Faint voices calling his name in tones almost melodic, almost pleading. He froze listening. The voices didn't match any language he knew, yet they felt intimate, familiar, and he understood deep in his gut that they knew him somehow, that they had always known him. That night, James heard the footsteps again on the floor above, but this time heavier. Slower, deliberate, he grabbed his flashlight and followed the sound. The staircase seemed to stretch farther than it. Should the hallway longer, the doors at the end closed, but not locked. The walls whispered as he passed. Shadows flickered just outside the light beam, and when he reached the door, it opened slowly on its own, revealing a room he hadn't seen before. A study filled with old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs, but the air smelled fresh with perfume. He stepped in and the door slammed shut behind him. A soft laughter echoed through the room. The mirror reflected not just him, but the empty chair across the desk. Rocking slightly back and forth, a faint outline of a woman appeared in the glass, her face indistinct, yet he felt her gaze on him, piercing and accusing. James stumbled back toward the door, but it didn't budge. The whispering rose to a crescendo, voices now all around him, chanting in rhythm. His heart pounded in his ears. He pressed his palms to the door to escape, and when he looked back at the mirror, the figure had moved closer. He could see her hands, now reaching through the glass, as if she wanted him to step inside the reflection. And then she smiled, the smile Helen had given him once long ago, warm and cruel at the same time, and he understood the cabin was no longer a place to live. It was a living entity, feeding on his memories, his grief, his solitude. The shadows crept closer, filling the corners of the room. He tried to scream, but no sound came. The air thickened like liquid surrounding him, and the reflection of Helen's eyes glowed red for a heartbeat, and vanished, leaving behind a smell of iron and cold soil. The next day, James awoke on the floor of the main cabin room, the fire still dead, the frost forming inside the windows. He felt a faint cut on his wrist, but didn't remember falling. He checked the walls, and the shadows seemed denser than before, crawling along the corners, reaching the ceiling and stretching into the floor. The sounds outside the cabin multiplied, birds screaming, then silence, then low growls. He dared not step outside the doors for fear. The forest had eyes and ears for him alone. He ate little coffee, only water from the lake, which tasted faintly metallic. He tried to write notes in a journal, but the pen leaked black ink that formed strange symbols on the page he couldn't understand, and when he looked up from the table, he saw footprints leading from the hallway into the living room that didn't match his own. At night, the whispers returned, louder, now almost urgent. His name repeated over and over, calling him toward the lake. The fire flickered with shapes that weren't there, and he swore he saw something move beneath the floorboards. The cabin seemed to breathe, pulsing with each heartbeat. He took sleeping pills, but they did nothing. The shadows waited outside the bedroom door. The lake rippled in the dark as if the forest wanted him to join it. He moved through the cabin only to find doors he didn't recognize, hallways that twisted impossibly. The mirror in the hallway now reflected the cabin as it had been decades ago, and inside it were people he did not know, dining at a long table with hollow eyes and pale skin. James realized then with a sickening certainty that leaving was impossible, that the forest, the cabin, the shadows were patient and eternal, that even if he ran, he would return. Somehow drawn back by unseen hands, the whispers promised company, yet demanded obedience, that the mirrors would show him truths he could not resist. The fire would burn only to reveal faces in the flames, and the lake would stir only to show reflection with eyes not his own. And each night the cabin waited for him to forget the world outside and remember only the darkness within. He understood the forest and the cabin were not separate, that they moved as one entity, breathing, living, waiting, feeding on grief, loneliness, and despair. And he understood also that this was no accident, that Helen's absence, the children's distance, the purchase of this remote cabin, had been invitations long ignored. And now the shadows would stay with him every step, every breath, every heartbeat, teaching him to see the shapes in the trees, hear the voices in the walls, recognize the cold eyes in the windows that blinked only for him, and that James Whitmore would never again feel alone, because the cabin, the forest, the shadows, the whispers had claimed him entirely. The next morning, James awoke to a silence so heavy it pressed against his chest. He moved slowly from the bed, the floorboards groaning under his weight, and noticed that the cabin had shifted somehow. The hallway that had been straight yesterday now curved like a snake, leading to a door he didn't recognize. He approached cautiously. The air smelled faintly of smoke and wet leaves, and the shadows along the walls writhed like living things. The mirror at the end of the hall reflected not him, but the cabin as it had been decades ago. A family dining in the kitchen, children laughing, and a woman smiling at him with eyes too. Knowing he blinked and the reflection shifted. The laughter stopped, the chairs scraped the floor slowly, and the shadows along the wall seemed to reach for him. He tried to back away, but the hallway stretched longer, the floorboards. Groaning with each step, the whispers began again, his name called, in low tones interwoven with laughter, and the faint scent of D.K. James moved to the kitchen. The cupboards rattled softly when he passed. The knives on the counter gleamed weightily, as if someone had used them recently. The smell of cooked meat hung faintly in the air, though no stove had been on. The refrigerator hummed unevenly, and when he opened it, the shelves were full of food that hadn't been there yesterday, but it smelled old, rotten, almost alive. He closed the door quickly, and the whispering grew louder, coming from the basement. He had never entered it fully before. The door at the end of the hallway stood closed, now unlike any other wood in the cabin, darker, heavier, with strange etchings. He pressed his hand to the surface and felt it pulse lightly, as if it had a heartbeat. Against his better judgment, he descended the stairs, the steps groaning underfoot. The basement smelled like wet soil and iron. Faint flickers of movement danced along